In a world where excellence meets prejudice, one man's meticulous documentation becomes his greatest weapon. Terrell Washington, brilliant engineer at Horizon Technologies, finds his groundbreaking medical implant project hijacked by a new department head with a hidden agenda. As his work is sabotaged, his position threatened, and his innovations stolen, Terrell doesn't fight back with emotion, he responds with strategy. Methodically documenting every interaction, preserving every altered file, and building an airtight case, Terrell exposes not just one racist manager, but an entire system designed to erase minority contributions. From isolated office to company-wide reform, witness how one man's commitment to justice transforms an organization and saves technology that will help millions. Racist boss sabotages black engineer's project, then learns he designed the company's billion-dollar patent. Would you document everything like Terrell did, or would you have confronted Richard directly? Comment your thoughts below and subscribe for more stories of justice served. Terrell Washington adjusted his tie as he entered the gleaming steel and glass headquarters of Horizon Technologies. At 42, he had spent 15 years building his reputation as one of the industry's most innovative electrical engineers. His designs had won awards, his patents had made the company millions, and his team respected him for his methodical approach to problem-solving. "Morning, Terrell," called Sophia from reception. "Ready for the big presentation today?" "As ready as I'll be," Terrell smiled, tapping his tablet where the culmination of 6 months' work resided. The new microprocessor design could revolutionize medical implant technology, making devices smaller, more efficient, and affordable for hospitals worldwide. The elevator carried him to the 34th floor where he nodded to colleagues as he made his way to his office. Photos of his wife Maya and their teenage daughter Zoe smiled back at him from his desk. They were the reason he pushed himself so hard, especially since Maya's mother had been diagnosed with Parkinson's last year. This project wasn't just professional, it was personal. "Washington," the voice from his doorway made Terrell look up. Richard Winters stood there, his pale face set in its usual tight expression. As the newly appointed department head, Richard had been with the company barely 6 months, yet had already established himself as someone who demanded results. At 52, he'd come from a competitor with glowing recommendations, though Terrell had noticed his demeanor changed drastically when speaking to certain employees. "Mr. Winters," Terrell said, standing to shake his hand. Richard barely touched his fingers before withdrawing. "The executive board meeting is moved up to 2 p.m. I'll need your presentation by noon for review." Terrell kept his expression neutral despite the sudden change. "That's 3 hours earlier than scheduled. I was planning to run final simulations this morning." "Is that a problem?" Richard raised an eyebrow. "I would think someone in your position could handle a simple timeline adjustment." "Not at all," Terrell replied calmly, though his mind raced through the implications. "Rushing the simulations increased the risk of overlooking something critical. I'll have it to you by noon." "See that you do," Richard lingered at the doorway. "And Washington, keep it simple. The board doesn't need all your technical jargon, just the highlights." After Richard left, Terrell opened his project management software and documented the conversation and time change. He'd been keeping detailed records of all interactions with Richard since noticing a pattern in how the man treated him versus his white colleagues. "Hey, everything okay?" David Chen, a fellow engineer and Terrell's friend since graduate school, appeared at his door. "Timeline got moved up. Need the presentation ready by noon now." David frowned. "That's the 3rd time this month he's changed your deadlines last minute. Nobody else gets that treatment." "Just part of the job," Terrell said, though they both knew better. "Need help with those simulations? I appreciate it, but I've got this." Terrell began typing rapidly. "Besides, you've got your own deadlines." David hesitated. "You know my cousin works in HR if you ever wanted to talk about." "I'm handling it my way," Terrell said firmly. "Documentation, excellence, and patience." As David left, Terrell pulled up his secure cloud folder where he kept meticulous records of every interaction, every email, every last-minute change from Richard. 6 months of patterns were emerging, and while Terrell wasn't ready to make an official complaint, he was preparing himself for whatever might come. His phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Good luck today." "Zoe's science project won first place." Terrell smiled, typing back congratulations. His family's success gave him strength, reminding him why he persevered through difficult situations with dignity instead of confrontation. By 11:45, he had completed the presentation, verifying the simulation's accuracy despite the compressed timeline. He emailed it to Richard with 15 minutes to spare, copying his own personal email as additional documentation. At 12:30, Richard appeared at his door again. "I made some adjustments to your presentation." He dropped a USB drive on Terrell's desk. "Use this version for the meeting." Terrell opened the file, scanning quickly through the slides. His heart sank as he saw that Richard had removed several critical technical specifications and added his own name as project lead. "Mr. Winters, there seem to be some significant changes here," Terrell said carefully. "The removal of the power consumption metrics might raise questions from the board." "Are you questioning my judgment, Washington?" Richard's voice carried just enough for nearby colleagues to glance over. "Not at all. I'm simply concerned about providing complete information. The board doesn't need to be bogged down with details." Richard's tone was dismissive. "Use this version, that's an order." As Richard walked away, Terrell saved a copy of both versions, his original and Richard's altered one, to his documentation folder. He then sent a brief, professional email to Richard confirming the changes while expressing his concerns about the missing technical specifications, ensuring a paper trail existed. The clock ticked toward 2 p.m. as Terrell prepared for the presentation, remaining outwardly calm while strategizing how to address inevitable questions about the missing data without undermining Richard directly. This was familiar territory now, navigating the minefield of Richard's subtle sabotage while maintaining his professionalism. Terrell knew that rushing into accusations would only make him appear emotional and unprepared. Instead, he would continue building his case, one documented incident at a time, until the pattern was undeniable. He straightened his tie once more and headed toward the conference room, tablet in hand and Richard's modified presentation loaded but with his original version also accessible. Whatever happened in that room, Terrell Washington would be prepared. The boardroom of Horizon Technologies hummed with anticipation as executives filed in for the presentation. Terrell sat quietly, reviewing his notes while Richard worked the room, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with the C-suite executives. "Let's begin," announced CEO Sandra Morales, a decisive woman in her 60s who had built Horizon from a startup to an industry leader. "Richard, I understand you and your team have made significant progress on the medical implant microprocessor." Richard stepped forward confidently. "Indeed, Sandra, we're excited to share our breakthrough." He gestured toward Terrell without making eye contact. "Washington here will walk us through the technical aspects." Terrell approached the presentation screen, his expression neutral despite the subtle dismissal in Richard's introduction. As he began the presentation using Richard's modified slides, he immediately noticed board members frowning at the lack of detailed specifications. "Mr. Washington," interrupted Gerald Foster, the Chief Technology Officer, "where are the power consumption metrics? That's critical for medical implants." "Excellent question," Terrell replied smoothly. "For context, let me share those specific metrics." He seamlessly switched to his original slides displaying the detailed data Richard had removed. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair as Terrell walked the board through the critical technical specifications. "I simplified those for time constraints," Richard interjected, "but we can certainly discuss details if necessary." "These aren't just details," Sandra said firmly. "This is precisely what makes this project revolutionary." After the presentation concluded to appreciative nods from the board, Richard quickly stepped in. "Thank you, Washington. I'll take any further questions from here since I've been overseeing the project direction." Terrell remained silent, documenting the interaction mentally to add to his growing file later. As the meeting adjourned, Sandra approached Terrell. "Impressive work. These efficiency gains could transform affordable healthcare access." "Thank you, Ms. Morales. That's exactly what motivated our team." "Our team indeed," Richard interrupted, appearing beside them. "Washington has been a useful contributor, though we've had to make some adjustments to keep the project on track." Sandra's eyebrow raised slightly, but she merely nodded and moved on. Back at his office, Terrell meticulously documented the meeting events while copying the presentation files to his secure folder. A knock at his door revealed David. "How'd it go?" "About as expected," Terrell replied, then lowered his voice. "Richard removed crucial data from the presentation. I had to reintroduce it when the board asked questions." David winced. "That's deliberate sabotage, Terrell, and difficult to prove as anything but a difference in approach unless I document a pattern." Terrell closed his laptop. "I'm building my case carefully." The next morning, Terrell arrived to find an email from Richard requesting an immediate meeting. When he entered Richard's office, the department head's face was rigid with barely contained anger. "You deliberately undermined me yesterday," Richard said coldly. "I respectfully disagree," Terrell replied. "I simply provided the technical information the board requested. You went outside the approved presentation. The board specifically asked for data you had removed. As the engineer responsible for the design, I had an obligation to provide accurate information." Richard's jaw tightened. "Going forward, you'll report to James Miller instead of directly to me. I'm also reassigning the medical implant project leadership to Davis." Terrell maintained his composure despite the shock. Davis was a recent hire with significantly less experience. "May I ask the reason for these changes?" Your communication style doesn't align with department needs, Richard said dismissively. We need team players who understand executive priorities. I see, Terrell said carefully. I'll need this reassignment in writing for the transition process. Richard's eyes narrowed at the request, but he nodded curtly. You'll have it by end of day. After leaving Richard's office, Terrell immediately documented the conversation. This reassignment, taking him off a project he had led for 6 months just as it neared completion, was the most blatant action yet. When Richard's official email arrived later that day, Terrell forwarded it to his personal account and added it to his documentation file. That evening, as Terrell described the day's events to Maya over dinner, his phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. Mr. Washington, this is Dana Rodriguez from Legal. I noticed some concerning patterns in recent project reassignments. Could we meet tomorrow, 8 a.m., coffee shop across the street? Terrell showed Maya the message. Looks like someone else has been paying attention, she said. Question is, Terrell replied thoughtfully, is this an ally or another trap? At 7:55 a.m., Terrell sat at a corner table in Brood Awakening, the small coffee shop across from Horizon Technologies. He had arrived early, strategically selecting a seat with a view of both entrances. His notebook rested beside his coffee, ready to document whatever transpired. A woman in her late 30s with dark-rimmed glasses and a tailored navy suit approached his table precisely at 8 a.m. Mr. Washington, Dana Rodriguez, thank you for meeting me. Her handshake was firm, professional. May I see some identification? Terrell asked politely. Dana smiled, sliding her Horizon Technologies legal department badge across the table. Smart precaution. After verifying her credentials, Terrell nodded. What can I help you with, Ms. Rodriguez? I've been monitoring project reassignments across departments, Dana explained, keeping her voice low. Your situation triggered several compliance flags in our system, especially given your performance records. I wasn't aware legal monitored departmental reassignments. We typically don't, Dana admitted. But after last year's discrimination lawsuit, we implemented automated tracking of project leadership changes, particularly when they involve high-performing team members from underrepresented groups. Terrell maintained his composed expression. I see. Mr. Washington, I'll be direct. We've noticed a pattern since Richard Winters joined the company. 8 project leads have been reassigned in his department alone. 6 were people of color, 2 were women over 50. That does seem statistically significant, Terrell replied carefully. Dana opened her tablet, showing a spreadsheet with highlighted names. What's more interesting is the timing of these reassignments. Almost all occurred near project completion when recognition and bonuses would be allocated. Terrell's suspicions were being confirmed, but he remained cautious. Why are you sharing this with me? Because you're the first to create a comprehensive documentation trail, Dana said. Most others either quit or accepted the reassignment without question. Your detailed records of interactions, preserved emails, and timestamp file versions, they create a pattern that's hard to dismiss. Terrell's eyebrows rose. How do you know about my documentation? Your cloud storage is on company servers, Mr. Washington. While the content is private, the metadata, file names, timestamps, access patterns, is monitored for security purposes. Dana leaned forward. And your organization system is impressively thorough. Terrell absorbed this information, weighing his options. What exactly are you proposing? I'm not proposing anything yet. I'm gathering information, Dana clarified. But if you're willing to share your documentation officially, it would strengthen an investigation that's already underway. And put a target on my back, Terrell added. Dana nodded. Potentially, yes, but you'd have legal protections as a whistleblower. And from what I've observed, you're already a target. Terrell considered his next words carefully. What happens to Richard if an investigation proceeds? That depends on the findings. At minimum, administrative review. At worst, termination and potential legal action if systematic discrimination is proven. And the medical implant project. Not my department, but typically original team leads would be reinstated pending review. Terrell took a sip of his coffee. I need time to think about this and to discuss it with my family. Of course, but don't take too long. Dana handed him a secure business card with her direct contact information. In the meantime, continue your documentation and watch for further retaliation. It often escalates when people like Richard feel threatened. As if on cue, Terrell's phone buzzed with an email notification from Richard. Effective immediately, workspace relocation to 10th floor auxiliary office. Clear your current office by end of day. He showed Dana the email. The 10th floor, Dana frowned. That's where they put contractors and temps. It's completely isolated from the engineering department. And makes collaboration nearly impossible, Terrell added, already forwarding the email to his personal account. This helps your case, Dana said quietly. Will you agree to officially share your documentation now? Terrell thought of Maya and Zoe, of his mother-in-law's medical bills, of the 15 years he'd invested at Horizon. Not yet, I need to be strategic about this. I understand. But remember, Mr. Washington, even the most patient people have breaking points. Don't wait until yours. After Dana left, Terrell remained at the coffee shop, creating detailed notes about their meeting. His phone buzzed again, a text from David. Did you see the email? 10th floor? This is ridiculous. Time to fight back. Terrell typed a measured response. Moving my things today. Keep your eyes open but stay neutral. This will be resolved properly. By noon, Terrell had relocated to a small, windowless office on the 10th floor, far from his team and the project he'd led for months. As he arranged his family photos on the desk, his resolve strengthened. This wasn't just about his career anymore. It was about changing a system that allowed people like Richard to thrive, while talented professionals were sidelined because of their race. He opened his laptop and began a new document titled Official Complaint, Systematic Discrimination, but didn't start typing yet. First, he would consult with Maya, perhaps speak with a private attorney, and prepare for whatever storm might follow when he finally took this fight into the open. The 10th floor auxiliary office hummed with the persistent drone of the building's HVAC system. Terrell's new workspace, a sterile, windowless room with outdated equipment, stood in stark contrast to his former office with its panoramic city views. For 3 days, he had methodically established his new routine, carefully documenting each interaction and roadblock created by his sudden relocation. You won't believe what I found, David said, closing Terrell's door behind him after glancing down the empty hallway. It was 7:30 a.m., early enough that few employees would notice their meeting. What are you doing down here? Terrell asked, concerned for his friend's position. Official IT consultation, David tapped his badge. But listen, I've been tracking the project files since your reassignment. Davis has completely altered your power efficiency calculations. Terrell frowned. Show me. David opened his tablet, displaying side-by-side comparisons of Terrell's original designs and the modified versions. He's increased the projected power consumption by nearly 30% in the documentation. If they build prototypes based on these specs, they'll fail, Terrell finished. The actual design is solid, but these altered projections would make the project appear unviable for medical applications. Exactly, and guess who's been accessing these files most frequently after hours? Richard, Terrell said with certainty. Bingo, and here's the pattern, this isn't the first project this has happened to. David swiped to a new screen showing a timeline of projects. I checked the version histories of 3 other projects where minority team leads were replaced. In each case, critical parameters were altered post-reassignment, leading to project cancellations or strategic pivots. Terrell leaned back, processing the implications. He's not just removing diverse leaders, he's systematically sabotaging their work to justify the removals retroactively. And after cancellation, key technologies mysteriously resurface in different projects, with white team leads conveniently listed as the original innovators. David's voice was tight with controlled anger. This goes beyond discrimination, Terrell, it's intellectual theft. Terrell opened his secure folder and added this new information. We need more than access logs and version histories to prove intent, he said thoughtfully. Have any of these altered technologies been patented? 4 in the last 6 months, all listing Richard as a co-inventor. David pulled up the patent filings. And here's something interesting, Richard's previous employer is fighting a patent infringement case involving similar technology. Terrell's pulse quickened. So he's potentially using Horizon to launder stolen intellectual property while simultaneously erasing contributions from minority employees. That fits the evidence, David confirmed, but proving it requires. A knock interrupted them. Dana Rodriguez stood in the doorway, her expression grave. Mr. Washington, Mr. Chen, I hope I'm not interrupting. David looked alarmed until Terrell nodded reassuringly. Ms. Rodriguez is from legal, she's been tracking similar concerns. After brief introductions, David shared his findings with Dana, who took detailed notes. This aligns with patterns we've detected, she confirmed, but we need more concrete evidence of intent. What about the prototype? Terrell suggested, if it's built to the altered specifications, it will fail publicly. Richard could then justify canceling the entire project line and reallocating resources. Dana's eyes narrowed. When is the prototype scheduled for testing? Tomorrow morning, David said. Technical review with potential investors at 10 a.m. Too soon to intervene officially without risking our entire investigation, Dana said. We need to let events unfold naturally while ensuring proper documentation. People's careers are being destroyed, David protested, not to mention potentially life-saving technology being buried. I understand the urgency, Dana replied calmly, but a premature confrontation risks giving Richard time to cover his tracks. We need incontrovertible evidence. Terrell considered their options. What if we don't stop the prototype testing but ensure it's transparent? I still have my original designs and simulations. Risky, Dana cautioned. You've been officially removed from the project. But I haven't been barred from attending public demonstrations, Terrell countered. And as the original designer, I could ask relevant questions if the prototype doesn't perform as my original design specified. Dana slowly nodded. That creates a public record without direct accusation. Just be careful not to reveal that you know about the alterations. I'll attend too, David added, as its support for the demonstration. As they finalized their strategy, Terrell's phone chimed with a calendar invitation. Mandatory HR meeting 3 p.m. today, subject, performance review. He showed it to Dana, whose expression darkened. This is moving faster than anticipated. They're building a case to terminate you before the prototype demonstration. What should I do? Terrell asked. Attend, answer truthfully but minimally, and record everything, Dana advised. Don't sign anything and defer any decisions pending legal review of documentation. After Dana and David left, Terrell called Maya. Things are accelerating at work, he explained. I might need that attorney consultation sooner than we thought. Already scheduled for 5 p.m., Maya replied. I had a feeling. Do what you need to do, Terrell. We're behind you completely. At 3 p.m. sharp, Terrell walked into the HR conference room with his tablet recording audio, ready to face whatever Richard had orchestrated next, knowing that tomorrow's prototype demonstration could change everything. The HR meeting had gone exactly as Dana predicted. Terrell sat across from Richard and Vanessa Parks, the HR representative, as they presented a file of alleged performance issues, all occurring after Richard's arrival. These concerns are substantial, Vanessa stated, sliding a probation agreement across the table. We're offering a 30-day improvement plan rather than immediate termination. I noticed these reports begin 6 months ago, Terrell observed calmly. My previous 5 annual reviews were exemplary. I'd like to review this documentation with my attorney before signing anything. Richard's jaw tightened. That won't be necessary for a standard probation. Nevertheless, it's my right, Terrell replied, maintaining eye contact. I'll provide my response by Friday. That evening, Terrell and Maya met with attorney James Wilson, who reviewed Terrell's comprehensive documentation. This is meticulous, Wilson noted approvingly. Most discrimination cases lack this level of evidence. The patent angle adds potential criminal dimensions. What's our next move? Maya asked. Tomorrow's prototype demonstration is critical, Wilson advised. If it fails as you predict, we document everything. I'll attend as your legal observer, just another interested party. The next morning, Terrell arrived early for the demonstration, finding a seat toward the back where he could observe without being immediately noticed. David was already there, setting up the presentation system. At 9:55, investors and executives began filing in. Richard entered with Davis, both looking confident. Sandra Morales arrived last, taking a seat in the front row. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard began, today we're demonstrating a revolutionary medical implant microprocessor developed under my department's guidance. Davis Williams will lead the technical presentation. Davis stepped forward, displaying slides that showed specifications matching the altered documents, not Terrell's original design. Our breakthrough allows for unprecedented power efficiency while maintaining processing capability. The prototype was brought out, a clear case containing the microprocessor connected to testing equipment. As Davis initiated the demonstration, the monitoring display showed power consumption numbers immediately spiking well above the stated specifications. That's unusual, Davis muttered, adjusting settings. Let me recalibrate. After 2 more attempts with similar results, Richard stepped in. New technology sometimes has unexpected variables. We'll address these minor issues before the next demonstration. Sandra Morales frowned. These aren't minor issues, Richard. These power levels would make the device unsuitable for implantation. Perhaps I can offer some insight, Terrell spoke up, standing from his seat. All heads turned. The original design specifications calculated power consumption differently. Richard's face hardened. Washington, you're not involved with this project anymore. That's correct, Terrell acknowledged. But as the original lead designer, I'm curious why the prototype's performance differs so dramatically from my simulations, which showed power consumption 30% lower than what we're seeing. Your simulations were flawed, Richard stated flatly. That's partly why the project was reassigned. Interesting, Terrell replied. May I ask which specific simulation parameters were adjusted in the current version? Before Richard could respond, Sandra intervened. I'd like to see both versions now, David stepped forward. As its support, I can access the version history immediately. He connected his tablet to the presentation screen and displayed Terrell's original specifications alongside the modified versions. The changes are highlighted in red, David explained. The original design had substantially lower power requirements, exactly as Mr. Washington stated. The room fell silent as executives and investors examined the differences. Sandra's expression darkened. Richard explained these modifications. Technical adjustments were necessary for manufacturing feasibility, Richard attempted, but his confident demeanor was cracking. That's incorrect, came a new voice. Dana Rodriguez had entered the room. Our technical review indicates the original specifications were entirely manufacturable. In fact, 3 internal engineers verified them independently. Richard's face flushed. This is highly inappropriate. Washington has clearly manipulated this situation. Actually, Dana continued, pulling out a folder, we've identified a pattern of similar modifications across multiple projects. All following reassignment from minority team leads to those you personally selected. James Wilson stepped forward from the back of the room. Additionally, we've identified concerning similarities between these modified technologies and patent applications filed by Mr. Winters, both here and at his previous employer. Richard's composure completely collapsed. This is a coordinated attack. You have no proof of intent. We do actually, David said quietly, tapping his tablet. Server logs show after-hours access to these files from your credentials with systematic alterations to key specifications. The pattern is consistent across 6 projects. Sandra Morales stood. This demonstration is suspended. Richard Davis, my office, immediately. Ms. Rodriguez, Mr. Washington, please join us with your documentation. She turned to the stunned investors. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for this situation. We'll reschedule once we've clarified these technical discrepancies. As the room cleared, Richard approached Terrell, his voice a harsh whisper. You think you've won? You have no idea who you're dealing with. Actually, Terrell replied calmly, I documented everything from day one, including this conversation. He gestured to his active recording device. I know exactly who I'm dealing with. The meeting in Sandra's office lasted 3 hours. Terrell presented his complete documentation, emails, file histories, recorded conversations, reassignment patterns. Dana provided compliance records showing systematic removal of minority leaders. David demonstrated the technical alterations and their timestamps. By the end, Richard sat in stunned silence as Sandra delivered her verdict. Richard Winters, you're suspended pending full investigation. Security will escort you from the building. Your company credentials are revoked effective immediately. As Richard was led out, Sandra turned to Terrell. I owe you an apology, Mr. Washington. Your position as project lead is reinstated, and we have serious work to do addressing the systemic issues that allowed this to happen. Terrell nodded, feeling vindication but no joy. Thank you, Ms. Morales. I look forward to getting back to the actual technology. As he left the executive floor, his phone buzzed with a message from Maya. How did it go? Justice in progress, he replied. I'll tell you everything tonight. The week following Richard's suspension unfolded with methodical precision. Terrell was formally reinstated as project lead. His office on the 34th floor returned, and a company-wide email from Sandra Morales acknowledged the situation without specifics, citing only an ongoing investigation into management practices. Terrell sat in Conference Room B with Dana Rodriguez, James Wilson, and 2 members of Horizon's board of directors. Spread across the table were tablets displaying the comprehensive evidence collected against Richard Winters. The pattern is undeniable, explained Dana, navigating through a digital timeline. Over 6 months, Richard systematically removed 11 minority employees from leadership positions, altered their work to appear flawed, then redirected their innovations into new projects under preferred personnel. Board member Dr. Josephine Chen studied the documentation with a furrowed brow. And our compliance systems didn't flag this. They did, Dana confirmed. But the flags were dismissed by HR Director Thomas Green, who cited normal organizational restructuring as justification. Terrell presented his screen showing a network analysis. We've identified communication patterns suggesting collusion between Richard and Thomas dating back to before Richard's hiring. They previously worked together at Tech Fusion Industries. The intellectual property concerns are equally serious, added James, displaying patent filings. These 8 patents filed under Richard's name at Horizon bear striking similarities to original work developed by reassigned employees. Furthermore, 3 appear to be derivatives of contested Tech Fusion technologies currently in litigation. The second board member, Jeffrey Barnes, removed his glasses wearily. So we potentially have discrimination, intellectual property theft, and corporate espionage. Has the FBI been notified about the IP issues? Not yet, Dana replied. We wanted board direction before escalating externally, Jeffrey nodded. Sandra made the right call bringing this directly to the board. This goes beyond one bad manager. It suggests systemic failures in our oversight mechanisms. Precisely why I'm here, Terrell stated calmly. My documentation shows 17 instances where I attempted to use existing channels to address concerns. Each was either dismissed or diverted. He displayed a flowchart of his attempts, emails to HR that received automated responses, ethics hotline reports marked resolved without action, manager complaints that never advanced beyond Thomas Green. A system that functions this way isn't broken, Terrell continued. It's operating as designed to protect certain individuals while creating the appearance of accountability. The room fell silent as his words sank in. What do you want, Mr. Washington? Dr. Chen asked directly. Structural change, Terrell replied without hesitation. Not just removing Richard and Thomas, but implementing verifiable safeguards against similar situations. My experience isn't unique, it's just unusually well documented. Jeffrey exchanged glances with Dr. Chen before responding. The board requires time to deliberate on appropriate actions. In the meantime, we're establishing an independent review committee to evaluate all project reassignments during Richard's tenure. After the meeting adjourned, Dana walked with Terrell to the elevator. That went better than expected, she observed. Having two board members directly involved accelerates everything. It's just the beginning, Terrell reminded her. Institutional change requires sustained pressure. When Terrell returned to his office, he found David waiting with a concerned expression. They've scrubbed the servers, David said without preamble. Someone with administrator access has purged significant portions of Richard's email history and file access logs. Terrell's expression remained calm. Expected, that's why we maintained offline copies and blockchain-verified timestamps of all evidence. Still, it suggests higher-level involvement, David noted. Administrator credentials aren't easily obtained. Document it, Terrell advised. Add it to the pattern. That evening, as Terrell was preparing to leave, Sandra Morales appeared at his door. Do you have a moment, Mr. Washington? Inside his office, Sandra spoke frankly. The board has shared their preliminary findings with me. They've authorized immediate termination of both Richard Winters and Thomas Green pending potential criminal referrals. That's appropriate but insufficient, Terrell responded. I agree, Sandra surprised him by saying. Which is why I'm establishing a new position, Ethics and Innovation Integrity Officer, reporting directly to me with board oversight. I'd like you to consider taking it. Terrell studied her carefully. Why me? Because you could have sued us, gone to the media, or simply quit. Instead, you methodically documented everything while continuing to do excellent work. That's exactly the perspective we need. I'm an engineer, not an administrator. You're a systems thinker who understands both technology and human dynamics, Sandra countered, and you've demonstrated remarkable ethical judgment under pressure. I'll consider it, Terrell said finally, but I have conditions. Name them. Full audit of all patent applications from the past year. Restoration review for every reassigned employee, transparent metrics for project assignments and promotions, and mandatory board review of any ethics complaints that exceed response timeframes. Sandra nodded. Reasonable starting points. Draft a formal proposal by next week. After she left, Terrell called Maya. We won, he said simply. Completely? No, he admitted, but significantly enough to create real change. I'm proud of you, Maya said warmly. Zoe wants to know if this means you'll make her science fair this weekend. Absolutely, Terrell confirmed. Nothing is more important. Later that night, as Terrell updated his documentation one final time, a news alert appeared on his phone. Tech Fusion Industries stock plummets amid rumors of patent fraud investigation. The system was larger than Horizon Technologies alone, and the ripples were just beginning to spread. 6 months after Richard Winters' removal, Horizon Technologies had undergone a transformation that extended far beyond personnel changes. Terrell stood at the podium in the company's main auditorium, addressing the quarterly all-hands meeting as the newly appointed Ethics and Innovation Integrity Officer. Today marks the completion of our comprehensive review process, Terrell announced to the packed room. All 32 projects that experienced leadership reassignments during the previous 2 years have been evaluated. 11 patents have been corrected to properly credit their original inventors. And most importantly, 7 employees who left the company due to systematic discrimination have accepted our offer to return with appropriate compensation and recognition. The screen behind him displayed metrics tracking the institutional changes implemented, transparent project assignment protocols, a triple-blind review system for promotions, and an independent ethics review board with direct board oversight. These aren't just policy changes, Terrell continued. They represent a fundamental shift in how we protect innovation and ensure all contributors receive appropriate recognition regardless of race, gender, or background. From the front row, Sandra Morales nodded approvingly. The crisis had initially threatened Horizon's reputation, but her decisive leadership and commitment to genuine reform had ultimately strengthened the company's standing in the industry. After the presentation, Terrell met with Dana Rodriguez in his new office, a corner space with glass walls symbolizing the transparency he'd championed. The federal investigation is expanding, Dana informed him, sliding a confidential report across the desk. Richard and Thomas aren't the only ones implicated. 3 executives at Tech Fusion have been indicted for conspiracy to commit industrial espionage. Their entire patent portfolio is under review. And our cooperation has kept Horizon protected, Terrell confirmed, fully. The DOJ considers us victims who took appropriate remedial action. Dana smiled slightly. Your documentation was described by prosecutors as extraordinarily thorough. Old engineering habits, Terrell replied modestly. Speaking of engineering, Dana continued, how's the medical implant project progressing? Terrell's expression brightened. First human trials begin next month. The power efficiency improvements are even better than my original projections. We're looking at implant devices that can function for years without replacement, making them viable options for patients in regions with limited medical infrastructure. Your mother-in-law included. She's scheduled for the second wave of clinical trials, Terrell confirmed. The neurologists are optimistic about how the new microprocessors will improve Parkinson's symptom management. As Dana left, David appeared in the doorway. The diversity initiative metrics are ready for your review, he said, now heading the newly established Inclusive Innovation Task Force. Applications from minority candidates have increased 43% since we implemented the transparent hiring protocol. Excellent, Terrell replied, and the mentorship program, 27 pairs actively engaged. Early feedback is overwhelmingly positive. After reviewing the reports, Terrell checked his watch 5:30 p.m. He packed his bag promptly, honoring his commitment to maintain work-life balance despite his expanded responsibilities. Maya had texted earlier about Zoe's science competition finals that evening. As he prepared to leave, Sandra stopped by. Heading out, Zoe's presenting her project tonight, Terrell explained. She's developed a simplified interface for elderly patients to monitor their medical implants. Sandra smiled, following in your footsteps. With much better presentation skills, Terrell laughed. Maya's influence. Before you go, Sandra said, her tone turning serious, the board approved your recommendation for the Innovation Credit Protocol. All patents will now include a mandatory contribution tracking system acknowledging everyone who substantially impacted the development, regardless of their final project status. That's significant, Terrell noted. It prevents future attempts to erase contributions. It's been named the Washington Protocol, Sandra added, in recognition of your work. Terrell felt a momentary loss for words. I'm honored, but the change matters more than the name. That's precisely why it deserves your name, Sandra replied. You never made it about yourself, even when you had every right to. As Terrell drove to Zoe's school, he reflected on the journey of the past year. What had begun as personal documentation to protect himself had evolved into structural changes benefiting countless others. The medical implant technology, nearly buried by Richard's sabotage, would soon help patients worldwide, including his mother-in-law. He arrived at the school auditorium just as Zoe was setting up her presentation. Maya waved from the front row, saving his seat. As he joined her, she squeezed his hand. How was your day, Mr. Ethics Officer? She teased gently. Productive, he replied, but the best part starts now. As Zoe confidently began her presentation, explaining how technology could be made more accessible for vulnerable populations, Terrell felt profound gratitude. The struggle had never been merely about his career or personal vindication. It had been about creating systems where talent and contribution were recognized regardless of background, where his daughter could grow up in a world that valued her brilliance on its merits. The injustice he'd faced had been transformed into systemic improvement. The documentation had served its purpose not just as protection, but as a foundation for change. And while the Washington Protocol would stand as a professional legacy, watching Zoe articulate her vision with such clarity and purpose, that was his true success. When Zoe was announced as the competition winner, Terrell and Maya rose to their feet applauding. The journey hadn't ended, institutional change required constant vigilance, but tonight was for celebration. Justice hadn't simply been served, it had been transformed into something far more powerful, progress.